Back in my early teens, when I was incorporating bits of Eastern mysticism into my spiritual life, which at the time was very Christian, and to be honest with you, it was a very surface level version of Eastern mysticism. It was some limited meditation, perhaps a little bit of energy cycling through my body, that sort of thing. But for the most part, I was just incorporating those practices into my Christian spiritual life. And I recall that as I got into, when I was 19 or 20, and I started having to look at Eastern mysticism in a much deeper way, I came to some very difficult points where if any of you have ever tried to do that, shifting from a Western mindset into an Eastern mindset, it is virtually impossible to retain the Western mindset. But Alan Watts, who of course was a great Eastern thinker, he was English, but he became very much an Eastern thinker and became horribly anti-Western thinking in many ways, particularly critical of Christianity. And I didn't like that. I didn't feel it should be necessary to, shall we say, diss my previous belief system as I was shifting over into a more Eastern one. I didn't think that was right. So I tried to retain both of those. And in doing so, I also tried very hard to remember exactly how my mind went from one concept to the other, which, as I've gotten older, has been increasingly difficult. But I try to remember those things. And so I'm going to share some of that with you today, because for me, the shift from a Western mindset into a more Eastern mindset, and hopefully coming back around to more of a middle of the road between those two, has involved a lot of intellectual translations. My mind does not work mystically. To those of you whose minds do work mystically, you probably know what I'm saying. My mind does not work that way. It's very intellectual. It's very logical, and I shift things kind of pound for pound. And one of the first really interesting paradoxes I ran into was how in Western thinking, and I'm using Western thinking in a very, very broad sense, but most Western religions, Judeo-Christian, Islamic thinking tends to be this way. We look for God out there. God is out there. And not only that, but we are very critical of the idea of looking for God inside. And most Eastern thinkers have more of a tendency to look inward instead of outward. God is inside you. He's not out there. And this seems like a paradox. It seems like a flat-out contradiction. And as I had to run into the point of realizing that there were no contradictions, I logically had to figure out for myself, okay, how is this not a contradiction? How can I resolve that paradox? And for me, it was relatively simple, but it took a while. And it's funny, it's one of those many paradoxes where once you look down on it, you realize it was pretty simplistic, but at the time it seemed so complicated. But as a Christian, there is this concept, depending on which denomination you are, the concept of having the holy breath inside you. That's one term for it, or that seed of good inside you. That first breath that God breathed into man, that really just means the good part of you. Now, obviously, certain denominations have more of a tendency to look at the entire body as being evil. We are evil, we are horrible, we are awful people, and only God can save us. And obviously, that's one way of looking at it. But I think no matter what, all of those theologies recognize there is something good inside us. Obviously, if there wasn't something good inside us, we wouldn't want to be good. We wouldn't want to be overcoming our own evil nature. So assuming for a moment, regardless of what jargon, what term you want to use for that, the breath of God, the seed of good, whatever, assume for a moment that there is something inside you that is good. Keep in mind, I'm talking from a Western perspective here. That seed of good, that part of you that does want to do what is right, in Eastern terms, you would say that that is the part that is connected to God. And when you really think about it, that's really absolutely no different than Christian thinking. The only difference being that an Eastern thinker goes inward to that seed, goes inward to that one small part of them where they can touch the divine. And there is no difference. There is no contradiction. God is out there. God is in there. There's a part of God in you. If you're a Western thinker, no matter what, there is a part of he, she, it, whatever, inside of you. Or if you're an Eastern person, of course you believe that. There's no difference. You could decide as an Eastern thinker, you could come around to the other side and say, well, I could project God outside, and I could look for him outside. That might be difficult for an Eastern thinker, every bit as much as it is difficult for a Western thinker to think of looking for God inside, because it sounds heretical and it sounds absurd. But in reality, it is just a translation. It's nothing but one thing being called the other. And whether you decide to look for God out there or in here, what's important is that we eventually find it, that divine spark in us that does touch something better than ourselves. Because I think it's in finding something better than ourselves that we evolve. We evolve as humans. We evolve spiritually, we evolve physically, and hopefully we get to that next plane. I'm the Urban Omnist. Maybe one of these days I'll try and do another little translation. Well, translating basically is when you try and take one set of words and turn it into another set of words that hopefully loosely resembles the first set of words, even though it looks absolutely nothing like it, but hopefully has a similar meaning. Does that make any sense? No. Back when I was first getting into Eastern mysticism, when I was just a youngin', and I was like this big, and I was trying to figure out what them yogis did, you know that stuff. Yogi, at first I thought Yogi was just a bear, and then I figured out he was some guy with a long beard and a diaper. That just changed my view of everything. Back when I was first trying to become one with the universe, and I figured out that I wasn't really all that good at math. I'm still not. What does X mean? I don't know. Where they buried the treasure? Back in my late teens, when I was first trying to get into this set of boxer shorts that were way too small for me, and I realized that they were like a size extra small, and even though I think I'm a size extra small, I'm really not. Isn't that deep? That is so deep.